Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. Here to a topic near and dear to my heart today, which is where do the Ravens save or where do they scrimp on dollars now that they've entered a new phase of Ravens football with Jackson on his second contract, eating up a lot of the cap. They certainly got other players. They've spent some future money in terms of Odell Beckham for next year, but really begs the question, and there will be certainly every individual transaction will be looked at under a microscope, through a lens like this. And here to talk about that with me is Brandon Croxton. Brandon, how you doing?
Hi, Ken. Good to talk to you.
Great to have you on the show again, Brandon. You've become somewhat a regular here, obviously a great deep thinker with regard to how the Ravens need to approach things as a GM. Love your thoughts on defense or offense, but really appreciate having you back on. So I want to let you kind of introduce the show a little bit. Jackson on his second contract now. How do the Ravens go by, maintain year-over-year contention, and still find places where they can save money to do so?
Right. So kind of managing the cap is probably, and being able to maximize the value within the cap is probably the most important job for a GM. And their goal should be to find and acquire players that can meet or exceed the value that they're paid within the cap. So, like for example, this year the cap is about $225 million. Eric DeCosta's job for this year should be to get kind of all of their players to be valued at around 260, 275 million in value to really be a good team or, a championship contender. And, over the next year or two, they've entered a new era, like you said, of Lamar Jackson being on a market value contract, and that's going to change the way that they attack their player acquisition. So if you think about it, like these past 5 years that Lamar was on his rookie deal, they probably got close to or probably even exceeded about $200 million in value out of Lamar over the past 5 years. And they only paid him less than $40 million over the first 5 years of his contract. So that is a huge surplus. And, lots of people say the most valuable thing in football is to have a good quarterback on a rookie contract. And that's exactly what the Ravens had for these last 5 years. And
Right.
now, yeah. And And now they're paying Lamar Jackson $50 million. And you certainly argue that he's worth it. But the value that they're getting out of Lamar is not going to be such a great spread because they're paying him his basic market value.
Yeah, and that is the point I make over and over again with the value relative to cap analysis I do usually twice a year, is looking at those players in terms of how much value you're getting relative to cap. Now, I don't try and quantify, as you're trying to do, the amount of dollars of value you're getting on cap, but yet you rarely can get a big positive surprise from a market value contract. If you sign somebody on their second deal, it doesn't matter who it is, honestly. Could be a wide receiver, quarterback, offensive lineman, whatever. You'll be lucky if you get that value out of that player. In fact, injuries much more common to players on their second contract. It's just the nature of life. And Brandon, you haven't played a lot of football. No, as you get older, injuries become more of a problem. And that starts much earlier than people really believe. Like even during your college career, you probably had increased injury risk or felt the aches and pains grow throughout that.
Oh yeah. My college career ended on injuries. I had a shoulder and knee injury my second year on the team, and that was pretty much it for me. So yes,
didn't mean to bring up bad memories, by the way, there. But I do really appreciate that perspective anyway. The basically when you sign a player on a second contract, the only surprise you're likely to get is a bad one. Okay, and certainly that goes for a third contract or whatever. And people have focused on running back contracts as the bugaboo because they're one of the worst in terms of getting back the money you spend in terms of value on a second contract for a running back. But lots of other positions are just as bad in terms of really not getting the value you pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of one of the things you want to think about, like when you sign a free agent, um, you're kind of trading off a little bit of risk for more of a little certainty. So when you sign a veteran player at any position, you basically know what that player is capable of. You know if he's a Pro Bowl caliber player, if he's an average starter, or somewhere in between. And you're you're kind of paying for the less variance, because if you draft a rookie out of college, they could be a future Hall of Famer or they could be out of the league in 3 years, and you really won't know.
Let
But
me
with the
respond to
free
that for
agent,
just a second, because you mentioned risk for certainty. You're paying for certainty. You're paying cost for certainty.
yes,
Yeah,
you're paying for, yes,
yeah,
yes, less variance. Like
yeah.
the player, you're definitely more understanding of the capabilities of that player.
Okay. And you being in the investment world, this is a common notion generally, and should be to anyone who wants to make a choice of investments. Is the more risk you're willing to take, the more upside you probably have. The Ravens have done very well at rolling their risks through draft picks and getting a great return on those. We just had a great show done on that, by the way. I want to ask people to go look at the draft success scoring show done with Charles Vanneman again this year. Just some great material in there about re-ranking drafts and seeing how well the Ravens did relative to what they were. I'll just leave that plug there. But that's the way to find talent that is undervalued has to be players on their first contract. And you only get them by two ways: off somebody else's scrap heap, actually three, I guess, through the UDFA process, or through draft picks.
Exactly, which is why draft picks are so important and why you want to have as many as you can, no matter the round, or you want to take as many chances as picking as many players, because the more picks you have, the better chance you have at hitting a player, finding that Pro Bowl player that's kind of undervalued through the draft process. Exactly. So yeah. Mhm.
All right. So let's talk again about what the Ravens have in terms of assets to apply to make up for the shortfall in total cap dollars they'll have in Lamar Jackson's second contract. They have whatever draft capital they have, and if Jackson is good, that might not be all that much. If Jackson continues to lead the Ravens to play as we hope, then the Ravens won't have a ton of draft capital relative to we'll call it the Detroit Lions of the world, but I think the Lions are actually an ascending team right now. But to some of the other NFL teams who have been consistent doormats, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, like the first thing that they did, and they've really had this philosophy, throughout their history, is to collect and draft as many players as possible. And um, they obviously have had more years than not the good problem of picking lower in the draft, picking in the 20s or even the 30s a couple of years. And that's really what you want year in and year out. So they've really become adapted, not having, the huge amount of draft capital is when you're referring to maybe like Jimmy Johnson points, the total of your draft class. But they offset that by finding ways to acquire picks using the comp pick system to you know to get more third, fourth, fifth round picks. And they make trades, they to to get more picks, they do all of that. And that's really the first way that they will have to continue in order to find more value, is make more picks, get more draft picks, make good picks, and make good picks, and find that undervalued uh, talent through the draft.
Yeah, very, very fortunately, the Ravens have been one of the most successful teams in terms of making the best use of their draft picks. I've said so many times on this, I'm not going to say it again about how much I hate the lottery ticket description of late round draft picks, but it's a load of crap. If you look at the history of drafting, particularly during the Ravens period of doing it, they've been one of the teams that has thoroughly dominated. And the other teams that have been good for most of the period the Ravens have been around, the Chiefs, the Packers, the Steelers, they all are great at it too. And really, you can't do without a consistent, well-structured front office. One thing that's nice is that money is outside the cap, and the combination of building a great front office and a great scouting system, having a structure and a culture you really believe in terms of valuing those draft picks, valuing the comp picks you can get, making good ones. That is all affordable on Steve Bisciotti's dime. He can decide what's an appropriate expenditure of money, and it's outside of that cap, which is very nice.
Yeah. You're exactly right. Another way you can really get value out of your player development is through coaching and coaching staff. And there's no cap on what you spend on coaches. So you can have, I think the Ravens have about 20 coaches on their staff right now. They could have 30 or 40, or they could have literally an individual coach for every player if they wanted to. But yeah, that's another way that you can kind of subvert the salary cap and improve your team is through player development as well.
Coaches are like pure gold at this point. I think Chuck Smith was one of the really big acquisition. The Ravens and all teams are like this. They have a very high flunk out rate for their coaches, and we don't necessarily see it at the coordinator level where there's been a lot of stability. Brent Wink Martindale was a 4-year guy, and Roman was a 4-year guy, and you don't have that very often. There aren't a whole lot of Dick LeBeaus in the National Football League who've been in one place for a whole long time. But 4 years, that's very stable in terms of keeping a coordinator around, because they get head coaching opportunities if they're outstanding, and they get fired if they're not. And it's kind of a very thin amount of runway there to be an Eric Bieniemy, who has been with one team for a long time with success, and not get an opportunity at a higher level, but also not get fired.
Right, exactly. I mean, especially when you're successful, because all the other teams want to be successful, so they're looking to pick off whatever whatever coach they can in order to improve their team. So they'll take your quarterback coach and make him an offensive coordinator. We obviously, Georgia had great success, and we took Todd Monken after a couple of years at Georgia. So that's exactly what happens, and it's a big carousel. And plus, you have just a huge turnover in head coaches, which means it's a huge turnover on the entire coaching staff. So that's also a case as well.
Yeah. So the coaching was another. One of the things I've really loved about what the Ravens have done on the fly during the season is they've been extraordinarily good at picking up players off the scrap heap who were especially made for their specific needs. And it's been done at a number of positions. But if you look back at the 2019 team, that defensive rebuild during the season, I've never seen anything like it. Never seen anything like it in terms of getting both inside linebacker positions switched out, getting 2 nose tackles who could both help you during the year. I'm trying to think of who else they brought in. Chuck Clark went in and took the green dot. Peters, of course.
Yeah.
and for almost nothing, Peters was a tremendously undervalued asset where he was, and the Ravens picked him up really cheap. And frankly, he played very poorly. So the Ravens do a very good job of projecting that player into their system well. And I think the more you have a system like the old Orioles did with a lot of platooning, the more you have an opportunity to find an undervalued property that's truly 80% of the player at 20% of the price.
Right, exactly. And the way to do that is kind of, what you see in college, and the Ravens have really implemented this over the course of their entire existence, is kind of a draft, develop, and replace model, where they draft a player that first year, they're more or less a red shirt, or they may have a small role. that second to third year, they become kind of a top backup, and they try to become third starters by their third and fourth year. And when it's time for them to, get that second contract and make the big bucks, they replace them. They get that comp pick back, and they start the process all over again.
Yeah, it's a very good model, and there's an additional component that they've done very effectively with some other players, and that is when they've got a starter who comes in year 2 or year 3 and they like him, and they can often probe with that player to see, do you want additional security in exchange for a little bit more friendly deal after the third year? Because of course free agency doesn't happen until after year 4, but they've got a couple players in that position right now that I'd be very interested in extending, in Broderick Washington and in Matabike as well on the defensive line. I think it would make a lot of sense to try and extend one of them, given the shortfall of players in particular there that they'll have after 2023.
Yeah, that's kind of the quandary that they're in. Is that's one of the positions where they don't have a lot of veterans after this year. I think they have a very good and very deep defensive line for this year, but the only veteran that will be under contract for next year is Travis Jones. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, they should definitely be looking to either Matabike or Washington to extend them, right now, give them, like you said, give them a little added security, and, give them more depth, because they're going to have to, they have no choice. They have to spend some money towards the defensive line, because they have no veteran. They have nobody under contract other than Jones.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, there have been some cases in the past where players either weren't offered, because we don't know all that. We don't know what players were offered in each case, what sort of contracts. But either they weren't offered contracts, or they didn't take them, and felt some of the pain for that. I think Brent Urban probably is a good example of a player that would have done much better in terms of his own career if he'd have taken a contract. I don't know if he was offered one. I don't know if the Ravens talked to him about that after 3 years. He really kind of had his breakout year as a Raven, I believe, in his 4th year with the team. So it's 2014, he was with the team and he got hurt. 2015, he came up and he had the blocked kick 6. And then 16 and 17, he played with the Ravens. And 17, he's really good and played a lot of snaps. And then he got hurt, and he re-signed, I believe, for 18 for that year, but then he left in 19. And so he missed out on kind of the real good times of the Lamar Jackson era. But the point is that his market value was greatly reduced by that injury in year 4. And players really need to look realistically at that. And there is a lot of money on the table to be divided for both sides that the Ravens have proven adept at getting. They got Chuck Clark very cheap after a third-year deal. I'm trying to think of who else that's really fit into this category. Patrick Ricard would be another. I'm trying to think of who else, but those are 2 good ones.
Those are 2 ones right there. And I kind of think of the flip side, that it also didn't work out great for the Ravens or the player. Just recently, Bradley Bozeman, who. Yeah. There were rumors that the Ravens were trying to extend him for like $8 million a year. I don't know, I don't know if that's 100% true or the exact numbers or anything like that, but he turned down the Ravens offer, went into free agency, and signed for a contract a fraction of that. And he got hurt last year, and so he may never end up making up that money that he lost in the potential extension.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good example. Matt Scurro would be another good one, who got injured in year 4. Anytime you see a year 4 injury, by the way, feel bad for that player. I mean, any year's injury, but year 4 is the pivotal year for you're going to sign your first big generational wealth contract. And if you're a pretty good football player, you'll get a pretty good contract, and is likely to be your one payday. Any additional amount of money, you could well be making the vet minimum, or you're going to be a guy that they'll always view. If you're a great player, you'll make more money. it's not the end of the world, but you still will lose a lot of money if you have an injury in year 4.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit now about some general strategies to save money and to find players. I guess we didn't talk too much about the UDFA route. You want to talk a little bit about that before we move on?
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
So it's an extension of the scouting. I think that they know a lot of the guys they like, particularly from small schools, that they want to bring onto the roster.
Yeah, and they have really been excellent at finding UDFA talent and developing them and having them make the team. I mean, you can go down a long list of undrafted players that have really become very good players. Bart Scott, Priest Holmes, Will Demps in the past,
Marcus Douglas,
Michael Pierce. I'm sorry,
Michael Pierce. Yeah, Michael Pierce, Marcus Douglas. I was going to say.
Yeah, Marcus Douglas as well. Yeah, and Michael Pierce most recently they've all become very good, valuable players in the league. And when you talk about value, you're paying that rookie $700,000 a year, and in the case of like Michael Pierce, who went on to the Vikings, I think he got like an $8 million deal from that. So you got $7 million worth of value out of Michael Pierce those 4 years he was here.
That's a good way to think of it in terms of value. What I just say is that the young players on their first contracts who are giving you value over cap cost are the absolute gold. That is your franchise is basically in the hands of those players. It's not. I mean, you certainly don't want to have injuries in your $20 million guy, which has happened with Ronnie Stanley, but you really can't afford to not have a cadre of players, and you'd like to have maybe 6 on each side of the ball. That's a little greedy, but you'd love to have 6 starters who are on their rookie deals that you're getting very cheap.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Ravens will always find a way to keep their star players. So, they re-signed Roquan. They will, I'm sure they'll re-sign, or they'll keep Marlon Humphrey, guys like that who are, really kind of the marquee players that are still playing at top levels. It really, I think what's going to end up happening is that the middle class players that they signed, that they really do a very good job at finding and signing, guys like Kevin Zeitler, who are not making the veteran minimum, but also not making big, huge contracts. Those are the guys that are kind of going to go away a little bit, and they're going to need to find, value in younger players and developing them.
Zeitler's a great guy to mention because 3 years, $22 million, I believe, was his contract, and he's been worth every penny. And I can't even tell you how rare that is for a free agent you sign, that you get more than the value you expected out of the player. And they're not. I don't think they're going to be in a position where they can afford to re-sign Zeitler next year. I think he's going to have to, unfortunately, be one of the cap casualties. And that's why they've looked. Voorhees is potentially an outstanding right guard replacement for Zeitler next year, if his health and recovery works as we hope it does. But you don't ever really do as well as you did with Zeitler. When the Ravens signed Elvis Dumervil a few years ago, it was a 5-year deal, and I took a lot of crap for it right away. But I said the likelihood is they will get one top shelf year out of him, one pretty good year out of him, and 2 years where he's battling through injury. And then you'll have 1 year where he's released on the last year of the deal, because that's the way these contracts often work for an older player. And I think he might have been 29 when the Ravens got him. And people say, you're being too pessimistic. That's basically exactly what the Ravens got.
I was about to say, you had a crystal ball. You saw that perfectly, didn't you?
Yeah, well, nobody wants to hear about Odell Beckham, believe me.
We can talk about that a little bit, because I think I'm probably more optimistic on the player that Odell Beckham can be, but I hated the contract that they signed for him. And especially the fact that they did the the void deals, and they pushed like at least $10 million into next year's cap for a player that we're not 100% sure what he is right now.
Mhm. Great point.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's very hard to really get a good handle on what Odell will do. There are some good things here. Maybe him working with Bateman on footwork, on route running, and whatnot is probably a good thing. I consider Bateman fairly polished in that area, but that doesn't mean you can't learn from the absolute master of the craft. And Beckham may be a guy who can go on to a reasonable career in coaching, given how polished a route runner he's been throughout his career. That is all he's got left at this point. It does not seem to me like he has a lot of speed. His separation becomes much more difficult for him, but you can make up for a lot with some wiggle at the top of the route, as long as you can sell multiple routes.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I saw a pretty decent receiver when he was with the Rams. I guess almost 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
Not a top receiver, definitely one that's starting to decline a bit. Um, I think he still has something to offer. And I make the argument, hey, if if us signing him allowed, Lamar to sign sooner or quicker than he would have, maybe that's worth a couple of $1 million. And I like the reputation around the league of him being a great teammate and being a mentor to younger players. That is certainly valuable beyond his individual production. Still don't think it makes up for that $15 million contract,
Right.
but I mean, like I do think he will bring positive to this team, and I think he can be a solid number two receiver, somebody that can get open, not maybe necessarily against a top corner, but a guy that can get open, get a little separation on a number two corner, and Bateman hopefully develops and stays healthy to be kind of that second tier number one receiver guy, like I would say Amari Cooper or Mike Evans.
Mhm.
A very solid, not top tier receiver, but a very, very solid number one receiver. And I think you have a really good offense if just those two develop in that way.
Well, I think they're going to need to get a lot from Zay to really make this work. For one thing, Zay's the only player who really takes the top off the defense as the offense is currently structured. That's not Bateman's game. Bateman can run all the routes, and I think he can benefit from having a guy on the opposite side of the field who has burner speed. And Jackson likes to have a deep target. It opens up the field between level 2 and 3 to have that, and basically every other receiver will benefit from that. And while I thought they kind of reached a little bit for Zay, I've warmed to the pick because I think that it's it exactly addresses their need. So at least it from that perspective, I think it's very positive. But if Bateman doesn't come back with a big year, I don't see Beckham being the guy who can jump in at the X spot and be the guy that the Ravens need. And I don't think they have anyone else. So he'd be forced into the role, and I really don't believe there's anyone else who could take it.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, just to kind of get back to what we were talking about, this is absolutely huge year for Bateman. He just needs to be able to stay healthy. And number two, he needs to develop and show that he can be a quality starter for this team. Because after this year, they have to figure out the fifth year option on him, and from there goes extension talks. And if he gets hurt or just isn't the player that we thought he was, the Ravens, they kind of might be forced to sign Odell to a moderate 2 or 3 year deal to bridge the way for another receiver. And obviously that also depends on how well Beckham does as well. But they're kind of this is a huge year for Bateman. I'll
Yeah.
just say that. Yeah.
I might go as far to say here is it's a really good year out of Beckham, even paying the $15 million, which is all sunk cost now, if he's not a big part of the offense because the other players are good. And that should be obvious, making a statement like that if Bateman and Zay are playing up to their level, if Mark Andrews is still Mark Andrews, if they're getting production out of tight end, if they're running the football effectively and they're not throwing in as many passes, and Odell Beckham ends up with 300 yards receiving for the year, that could well be a very good result for the Baltimore Ravens. It's not necessarily a terrible thing by any stretch. Now, I don't think that Beckham is going to go full Antonio Brown on the Ravens in terms of being a distraction on the sideline. Yeah, well, we hope not. I mean, it'd almost be impossible at this point. But we've seen Terrell Owens do it. We've seen other older receivers become a significant distraction. We certainly have seen older receivers overvalue themselves. Unfortunately, Beckham got the value from the Ravens. So one of the things is that he may feel empowered, enabled to walk into whoever's office, whether it's Harbaugh or DaCosta even, and say, "Hey, you paid me $18 million to come here for a year. Play me." Kind of thing at some point, even when the Ravens have, phased him out of the offense. And going back to just 2 years ago, and I don't want to make this a show all about Beckham, obviously, he had 6.5 yards per target. Now, if you say that he was injured then, I can understand that, but I can't see him recovering to even being a 7.5 yard per target receiver, given the generalized decline in yards per target he's had for his whole career. His best year was his rookie year. And he's basically declined in a straight line fashion, or very nearly so, all the way through his career to his current age 29 or so season. So my optimism is limited with regard to that. But I do think there's a path here that Beckham could provide something as a good teammate, a good mentor, and I hope he can adapt to that role. I really hope he can.
Yeah, I just on the flip side. Yeah, yes, his yards per target have declined. I will say Lamar Jackson is by far and away the best quarterback you'll ever played with in his career.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think a declining Eli is probably the best that he's ever played with, and I mean, obviously the Baker years in Cleveland that can mess with anybody.
Yeah, Stafford though.
Yeah, and he was fine. Yeah, and he was fine. He was fine with the Rams, but it was also just 8 or 9 games that he was with there, so you don't get a great chance to do a rapport. They probably had a couple of things that they could do, and he was fine. And I mean, obviously he looked great in the Super Bowl. If we could get that player, if a year and a half that he's been out, he can just recover to be that player, I think he will be a great asset to the offense with all the other pieces that are around him.
The Ducks are aligned, and having other good receivers around him, having a good quarterback, having a good offensive line for that matter, having a quarterback who extends plays may make him one of the targets. I'm really interested to see how locked in Jackson is on Andrews this year, because I think that's going to tell us a lot about where we are. It could be Flowers is a new guy that he goes to as we're getting to 3 and 3.1 seconds of time to throw. It could be he's the guy he's looking for all of a sudden. It could be that Beckham is a guy there. And it really kind of depends on how the Ravens are challenging space. That's one of the reasons to be excited, I think, about Monken's offense is who is going to really benefit from becoming a trusted late play target of Jackson with the weapons they now have.
Yeah, and me personally, I also want to see a lot more of Likely in the offense. I'm hoping, like Todd Monken is looking at those 2010 Patriots teams that had Hernandez and Gronk, all over the field, one tight, one split wide. I don't necessarily know if we need to have one of our tight ends as a running back that they did back then, but this is an exciting offense just in that they can be so varied in their personnel. They can run 22 personnel and just run bully ball one possession. Next possession, they can run five, empty set and throw it all over the place. And they have the personnel to do it and just have Lamar just run around and do his thing. So it's exciting to see. Like I want to see it all. And I know they have the good problem of trying to get all of these guys, enough targets to keep them all happy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well, no more Beckham stuff. Let's get back to the central question of this show, which was the Ravens now have a lot of their cap accounted for, and it's between a relatively small cadre of players that includes Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley, which, by the way, might be one of the places where they have to try and find cap fairly shortly. I don't know if it's really after the 23 season, if it makes sense now, but they haven't yet pushed money out further from 23, I don't believe, on Stanley. So it's one of the ones you've held back. And that's usually an indicator that he might be one of the players who will be, they're considering cutting, and they don't want to use that money in advance. But obviously the question has to be, and it's going to be asked at every position, where can they really spend less? They spent a lot of money at inside linebacker. That's another one where has not been the Ravens' way for quite a few years now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Good. Yeah. So inside linebacker is definitely a position. I think with them drafting Trent Simpson is writing on the wall for Patrick Queen. Unless Patrick Queen takes his game to a whole different level than what it's been in these first 3 years, that makes him just absolutely invaluable to the team. I think he's pretty much as good as gone. And I mean, he's still a good player. Like he was good for us this year. Hopefully he'll continue that. And this is where you just you drafted him, you developed him, and now you kind of look to replace him.
Right.
And now you have Trent Simpson that I'm excited about. Looks like a solid player and is very much in the same mold as Patrick Queen. So he could be ready to roll in a year too.
They really loved him as a value pick. Simpson much more developed in terms of how much inside linebacker he's played when he's first getting to the Ravens. So that's nice. Even though he's played other things, he's played safety but in terms of responsibilities as a will linebacker, which is where he'll be asked to play, he's much more attuned to that spot. And I think it'll be a easier transition for him than it was to Queen for the NFL. And frankly, it better be, because Queen had a very tough time adjusting, and the Ravens asked a lot of him. I mean, they came in with as a 28th overall pick. They wanted to make him a starter right away, and he had a ton of growing pains.
Yeah, exactly. And Simpson will probably get his chance to get significant playing time next year, and so he'll have at least a year of development. Maybe they get him in a couple of packages, in a defense during the season, but you're not expecting him to get a lot of snaps, especially with Roquan's going to take hopefully 100% of the snaps, and Queen will take, a significant amount, and then, Simpson will just get snaps here and there to give a guy a rest or, a special play here or there.
This is a very interesting point, because one of the things, the Ravens have been remarkable in their ability to find players snaps at corner. And I go back to 2018. I think it's 2018 when Marlon Humphrey was the team MVP, and he played not a high percentage of the team snaps because they were rotating all three corners that year. But at inside linebacker, I think, first of all, I think Roquan's going to have the green dot this year. I don't think they could give it to Hamilton, I suppose. They'd probably have to move him to strong safety to do it. But I think Roquan makes the most sense to have the green dot with Chuck Clark gone. Geno Stone could also have it, by the way, if they make him the full-time strong safety. So that's another possibility. But probably Roquan gets the green dot. If that's true, that takes away all the snaps from it could potentially go to any other Mike linebacker. And the other thing that will be interesting is a lot of opportunities created by injury, but I don't really see injury creating opportunity for Simpson or in the same way because, well, my first reaction is I don't even know who the Ravens would try and play at Mike linebacker again if anything were to happen to Roquan. And I assume it would be Queen, but he's such a mismatch in terms of his characteristics relative to the position. He's so much more valuable as a will, as a moving chess piece, as a guy who can chase as opposed to lead to the ball carrier. He's just not that guy. And I unfortunately, I don't think Simpson is either in terms of being a Mike linebacker.
Right. And I totally agree. I really don't know who would replace him at Mike.
As a former defensive player, can you explain those roles in terms of their differences, in terms of what the Mike linebacker's responsibility is and what the weak side linebacker's responsibilities are?
Yeah. So Mike, he's the middle linebacker. He plays in the middle of the field. He is reading. He's taking on blocks, getting off of blocks, and running to the running back. Essentially, that's what he does. The weak side linebacker plays a little bit more in space. He can shoot gaps or he trails. He's the will because he's lines up on the weak side of the offense. So if the tight end is on the right side of the offense, then he lines up on the left side of the offense, opposite of the offense, and he's basically he reads, he runs to the ball, and because he's on the offside of the offense, he is usually able to not have a blocker or have the angle of the
Less
blocker
likely.
and be able to run to the ball a lot easier. Yeah, and it's more free willing. Yeah.
Okay, so normally most teams are right-handed, meaning their tight end will typically line up on the right side, being the strong side, and that's often a function of having a tackle who can also block on that side, having your right guard being a guy whose characteristics are opening the gate for a puller. That they have good upper body strength to torque and usually length to torque that defensive tackle and turn his shoulders, get that pathway open, and then allow others to run through behind him or off his hip to make blocks that lead the play. Well, the Mike linebacker has to negotiate all that pulling traffic, and he's kind of in the crosshairs of anybody who's coming through a space as a puller or a lead fullback or whatever. But the will guy is kind of a trail or trash picker, trash cleaner, whatever you want to call it, who's scraping along the line of scrimmage. And a lot of players might be able to block him, but he definitely faces less risk of being blocked. Do I have that basically accurate?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And usually your will guy is the quicker guy. He's usually the guy that's your middle linebacker is kind of big, strong, tough because like you said, he's taking on offensive linemen, pulling guards, fullbacks, and he's got to take them on in the hole and kind of clog up the hole and make a mess essentially, so that the running back can't get around him. And then the will kind of comes in and makes the cleanup tackle or shoots a gap and gets inside to just stop the play and make that tackle as well. Yeah.
All right. So outstanding. So I've always been of the philosophy anyway that platooning at will linebacker really made a lot of sense because for the first thing being that your third best coverage safety is always better than your second best coverage linebacker in coverage specifically. And so on a high leverage passing down, you want that safety out there in the will spot. You don't need nearly as much in terms of run fits and whatnot on a typical obvious passing down. And that also that player probably gives you a little bit more or about the same in terms of spying the quarterback when you need that to be the case. But they definitely give you a lot more in zone coverage. And I can just tell you, it is night and day watching safeties in terms of what they understand about what's going on behind them. And in particular, young linebackers in terms of what they understand what's going on behind them, because they oftentimes it's a very difficult thing to pick up.
Yeah, it's generally kind of the last thing that a linebacker really kind of excels at is just being able to understand route concepts, what's going on behind them, because the safety plays in space. They have a lot of ground to cover. They have to know what's going on in front of them and make sure nobody gets behind them. Linebackers kind of play more in phone booths or
Mhm.
very tight spaces. So their field vision isn't as great as a safety is,
Right.
and it really comes with experience. Like the older, even when they're younger, the passing game isn't as developed. So like when they're in the lower levels, like high school and maybe even college, they're not. The passing game isn't as developed and sophisticated as it becomes in the NFL. So they don't get as many reps as to be able to kind of contribute in the pass game as much to
Mhm.
begin. Yeah.
It's always something that Brandon Crawford reminded me whenever I would criticize players like Patrick Queen. He's an important one, but there have been other linebackers in the
Mhm.
past as well that they're just not picking up what's going on behind them. You'd always say it's that's usually the last thing, and it's you're making the point again. I appreciate that. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a different perspective on the field too, because if you're a strong safety on the back end of a cover two shell, one of the things
Mhm.
you have to do looking at the line of scrimmage is to pick up and understand those route concepts play after play. You very rarely have
Mhm.
an over the top one size only coverage responsibility. You might have that if you had Randy Moss or something on the field and you're on his side, and then you got, okay, well, wait a minute, we're double covering him, and that's he's my guy. But a lot of the times
Mhm.
you have to make a choice between routes. And the big
Mhm.
plays in football, long passing plays, are often decided because a safety decides to bite on Mark Andrews on an underneath or deep crossing route or whatever, and some
Mhm.
Marquise Brown or whatever is on that side is allowed to run free, or vice versa. But that
Right.
safety's
Exactly.
decision is critical to that play, and so they tend to
Mhm.
learn very quickly by trial by fire. That things
Mhm.
are going wrong, and it's just the linebackers, they just have a harder time looking at the line of scrimmage, looking at the way that the five eligibles are lined up, and figuring out where everybody's going to go.
Right. Yeah. It takes a lot of film study to do that, way more than I could ever have done. You know. But yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And you kind of have to learn it as a lineman too, like you, right? Because you want to make sure you know where those passing lanes are to get your arms up a lot of the times.
Yes, that's pretty much it. It what I would I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm 6'6", so I played when I played defensive tackle. I basically kind of read the quarterback. If he did a three-step drop, I got into kind of a lane and just stopped and just put my hands up, and you know every few times you can tip a slant pattern that's going on behind you or something like that. But it's hard to see, and it's more about reading the quarterback than knowing what's going on behind me, because I'm not fast enough to react to a wide receiver, whatever he's running anyway. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a little bit of luck and there's a little bit of intuition going on when it comes to defensive linemen in
Well,
that respect.
good
Yeah.
perspective there. Did you try and maintain an arm for separation on the defensive lineman, or were you a full commit with two arms up?
I was two arms up, and
Okay.
I ended up flat on my back sometimes from
All right. Small price to pay, right? Though
Yes,
probably I'm not the one getting hurt.
yeah, if you tip a ball and that ball becomes an interception, it's a feel good if you flat on your back.
There you go. All
Hmm.
right, so let's talk about other places where the Ravens can save. I mean, the big expensive positions, they've already spent the money in a lot of ways coming up. So
Hmm.
if I'm going to go through the big four, it's left tackle. They got a
Hmm.
cornerstone contract there. It's
Hmm.
cornerback. Now they could have two contracts there, but they have one really big one. Rock Yasin's not making that much money. He's also he's not a top tier cornerback by any
Sure.
size.
Yeah. Hmm.
They don't really have any ball skills currently at quarterbacks. So they're not really paying that. They've got a couple of positions on defense where they are spending a ton of money, but you don't absolutely have to. And one is in that free safety tool set, which they've got now in multiple players. But they have Marcus Williams, who looks to be worth the contract so far from what we've seen. They have Geno Stone, who's a cheap guy, but has free safety skills for my way of thinking, or at least center fielder skills on the back end of a cover two shell.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And then they have Hamilton, who they moved into the slot because, damn it, they didn't have anybody to play slot corner, and he's the best option they had, which it's incredible that he was as successful as he was as a rookie. And I think the Ravens are almost in a point where they're going to be committed to moving him there again this year. I don't see the other player currently with the team who outplays Hamilton for that spot. And especially considering that the other safety you would get on the field is Geno Stone out of this.
Yeah. I totally agree. Like, the Ravens have really kind of been interesting in being kind of counter to what most teams generally do, because they've really built their team. They've used a lot of, cap dollars and a lot of draft capital on kind of non-traditional positions. So, like you said, Kyle Hamilton, first round draft pick. He's a safety. You spend a lot of money on Marcus Williams. You spend a lot of money on Roquan. And those are kind of positions, safety and linebackers usually aren't, big money type guys. I mean, and they spend a lot of money there. And, the more traditional big money players, like outside linebacker, they have two guys on rookie. Bowser is on a second contract, but you have Owe and Ojabo that you're looking to kind of step up and be the next great pass rusher for this team. They're on rookie contracts, but we don't know exactly what we have in them this year, and this will be another important year for Owe, is whether they exercise that fifth-year option and potentially extend him, and what is he going to be in the long term. So.
How optimistic are you about Owe right now?
You see the athleticism is just off the walls. I mean, he's probably a top 5 athletic wise outside linebacker in the league. It's the development just hasn't been there. As far as just learning how to pass rush, using your hands, setting up the tackle with different moves to the inside, outside, all of that. And, that's something, like, I don't think he's played a long time. I don't think he's played football in general for a long time. So those things, take time to develop. I always joke is, like, I want him in the off season to be studying just martial arts, karate. He needs to go to Cobra Kai. He needs to go to Miyagi-Do. He needs to learn all the martial arts and be able to use those hands, be able to use your feet, because the athleticism is just it's just so incredible that there should almost be no reason for him not to be developing into a top player this year, or at worst next year.
Right.
Hopefully we'll start to see it this year.
I'll just say I'm extremely optimistic about his year 3 coming up. I think he'll be outstanding. The issue for me, and this is interesting because I don't know how you train on this, but as a former defensive lineman, you may have ways that you did this. His get off needs to improve. If his get off is great, left tackles are going to start shaking as the snap approaches. A lot of things happen with that, by the way. First of all, you probably get some false start penalties out of an opposing offensive lineman. That's a great place to start. Second of all, you get that great benefit of overreaction to the first move, which allows you to develop that pass rush plan second move. So move counter. And if he can just extend his arm in some ways, sometimes it's a Euro step, sometimes it's a spin move. It could be a lot of things. But one thing you can guarantee is that he's going to be a better athlete than every single left tackle he will ever face in the National Football League. So if he can just improve that get off, he's going to be a dominant force, I believe, in terms of where he is. He's getting a lot of pressures. right now. He's not
Hmm.
getting home. A lot of his stuff is clean up in terms of that. If his get off could improve, I think that'd be the thing. So you mentioned the Mr. Miyagi stuff. What do they have for defensive linemen for edge rushers in terms of improving get off?
It's like all the only thing that I've ever seen is just you just work on getting off at the snap. You watch the ball, and as soon as that ball starts to creep, you just take off, and it's something that kind of you almost just enough maybe enough reps really help you improve on that, but I, there's not really anything else I've ever seen that kind of improves on the reaction of it.
Okay, going back to a non-defensive lineman, Ed Reed, when he was having his success blocking punts in early in his career in '02 and '03, the thing he told people in interviews was that when he blocks a punt, he's usually beating the center. Like he could watch the center, watch the ball rotate, watch it move. As an edge, can Owe could Owe pull something from the Ed Reed book? Or it seems like the way they teach it when I've been at camp is the old football on a stick prop they use,
Hmm.
and the defensive line coach is pulling it back, and he may do certain things in terms of kind of tipping the football up and whatnot, but I think he's trying to kind of intentionally throw off the players sometimes.
Hmm.
And then you move it back and you see who's getting off, and obviously they're looking at that and trying to improve it. I wonder if there would be a tool or a simulator or something they could put players in that would improve their get off. That would be, whatever you had to spend, it wouldn't be too much within
Yeah,
within reason.
I'm sure the NFL has ways to do that. It's just never not anything that I've ever seen. Yeah, like all the tools I've ever seen, like yes, the stick with the football on it, and and even like you have the center. We have a center that would just hold the ball and he would do his normal snap, and we would watch that and see that over and over. But yeah, it's never been anything outside of just watching it over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually seems like a reasonable thing to do. And I know offensive linemen are typically in their own position groups. At the same time, you'd have defensive linemen. But yeah, it seems like sending a couple of your centers over to practice with the defensive line and using a technique they think they can get away with, and maybe having the drill be officiated would be a good start there, because the center is trying to win. He's trying to say, I need to snap this ball, or I need to show the point of the ball at a certain time where I'm allowed to do it. I know I'm allowed to do it. I might draw an offsides out of it. And these guys are trying to beat
Hmm.
me by getting off the snap quickly, and then there's somebody judging that. And it does seem like maybe some non-traditional methods of joint positional drilling might make sense there. But in particular, I mean, there's something a center has to learn from that sort of engagement.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah. Like I said, I've never seen anything kind of anything more in depth than just the traditional of having a center or having the stick there. But yeah,
Mhm.
I'd love to. I think it would be probably be pretty cool if they had some virtual reality or
Yeah.
something else that players can use to you know improve that skill, because it's hugely important as well.
All right, given where the Ravens have spent money, is there any hope that, I mean, it would seem like running back is going to be a position where they're going to let most of their players go this next year. With J.K. will be through the fourth year, and even if he has a good year, I don't know how if he has a good year, I don't know how the Ravens can afford him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, running back is another position that's going to be kind of hard, because they don't have anybody under contract next year. Um, and so J.K. and Gus Edwards are unrestricted free agents, and so is Justice Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So if all of them leave, they're not going to go with one or two rookies, even if they're first round and second round draft picks. They're not going to go go with a rookie as a starter right out of the gate. They're gonna have to spend some money as a veteran running back. So they can make a trade off. Like, do you even consider maybe bringing back a JK on a 3-year moderate deal? Do you find another relatively cheap running back. I hope they don't go back to the veteran scrap heap that they did
Yeah,
back
that
in
hasn't worked.
21 when, yeah, with Murray and the other one, well, all of the other ones that they had, 2 years
Murray,
ago.
Bell. Let's remember the names. Freeman. Let us never forget.
Yes, it would have been great in 2010 to have that backfield, not in
Yeah.
21 though.
Yeah, I actually think that Keaton Mitchell ends up being a very key player in camp this year because he, first of all, can fulfill. I mean, he's definitely a massive speed guy, and
Yeah.
he can fulfill the what Justice Hill was supposed to be if he can master the mesh point. But I think that's an absolute key in what the Ravens try and do is you got to have guys who can let the ball comfortably stay in there for a while before they tighten up on it and go. And Mark Ingram was the master, and we did not appreciate him enough for when he was here with all of the things that have gone wrong since and before, for that matter. Edwards had a lot of trouble with the mesh point as a rookie. We look at all those Lamar fumbles. Well, a lot of those were Lamar to Edwards handoffs that didn't work out. And I think because of their situation for 2024, that we'll see a lot of focus on Mitchell's play in camp this year and maybe during the regular season. I think he's likely to make the team in some manner, and it may be he's an IR guy that they hope to return, or even an IR guy that they redshirt, depending on how much they like him, obviously. But anyway, tell me where you think about Keaton.
I'd like it. I mean, 4.3 speed at running back, with the space that they can create with Lamar, the space you can create with Flowers and the receivers. I mean, you love it. And if he's able to, kind of master the mesh point, be able to be that the sidecar guy that can stretch and threaten the outside. I mean, that's exactly what you want. But I mean, even if he does develop, I'd love to see him make the team. I'd probably, it'd probably be between him and Justice Hill. So I think even if Justice Hill is maybe just a tiny bit better, you probably go with Mitchell at that point. But
it's a reset.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. But even still, if he develops a decent role on the team, they're still probably going to have to find a veteran running back and spend some money on that because you're just going to have him if he does indeed make the team. Yeah,
it's unfortunate that the Ravens had a fair amount of success finding the guys who were on somebody else's scrap heap, and they were super cheap. And they found that Collins was one of the really big ones that they got some real value out of for a while. And I always forget some other players who exactly fit into this mold. But Gus Edwards was a UDFA, for example. There has to be some willingness to try that, as opposed to overvaluing, at least as I've seen so far, overvaluing veterans for their projected mesh point value. And I've been very frustrated with the Ravens in terms of all these veteran linemen, veteran guys they've picked up, and the only one who really has worked out is Ingram in terms of an ability to master that mesh point. But players like Bell's a very patient runner. You would think he would have been a guy who would like to run behind an offensive line that'll create space for him, that takes the time to pull, that has Lamar Jackson as a threat, right? Going the other direction behind him, that is otherwise generally horizontally stretching the field. Would be a player you'd really like to, a team you'd really like to run for. But Bell never really seemed to have those mesh point characteristics either.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think he was just on his last legs when we had him anyway. Like he didn't have that explosiveness or anything that we saw for years when he was with the Steelers. So
yeah.
All
right.
Yeah.
Any other positions you want to talk about before we call it here?
So yeah, no, I think probably also interior offensive linemen are another way that they can kind of save or look to save. Like you said, they drafted
Voorhees.
The Voorhees, yes, and the other lineman that I'm not even going to try to pronounce his
Yeah,
name.
we'll call it Mal or Salah.
Yes, yes, Salah. Yeah, yeah, I've, they're working on a competition with them. They're looking to save at guard, at left guard right now. They have the competition between yeah, Cleveland and Simpson. Um, so
McCary, perhaps, yes.
yeah, yeah, perhaps McCary also. Although I do love him as a six offensive
Mhm.
lineman. I think he's been tremendously valuable there. Kind of almost don't want to see him start anywhere, but um,
Me
he's
too.
been a really good six man. Yeah, yeah, and this is where you just have to draft, develop, and replace. And they kind of broke their pipeline of interior linemen because they they didn't draft well. They drafted Bredesen and Tyree Phillips.
Mhm.
Neither one of them even made it out of their first contract, and they took a couple of years off as far as drafting guys before this year to kind of fill that gap. And so yeah, they need to really kind of throw some draft resources inside because um, they're not going to be able to probably sign like you said, a Zeitler or another guy of that caliber and that price in free
Right.
agency. So yeah.
Yeah, it's going to. I mean, obviously, Calais Campbell now gone, but I would agree. I think that they're going to try and go cheap on the interior offensive line. It might mean that Linderbaum goes after 5 years. He's a first round pick.
Potentially. Yeah.
Obviously, in his case, it actually becomes a very difficult decision to pick up his fifth-year option because he's a center and they group all offensive linemen together. That includes tackles who are making a lot of money. And so
Mhm.
it becomes a more difficult decision there. But we're so far away from that, we won't worry about it yet.
Yeah.
Excuse me for 1 second here.
That's okay.
But yeah, it's something that will have to be decided upon. Obviously, I do think the Voorhees pick is just remarkably savvy for the Ravens, and the other piece of the puzzle that I didn't realize originally was that Voorhees is going to probably get the NFI designation for the full year this year. That's not what happened to Ojabo, who got an NFA designation for part of the year and then was brought back, and so he registered a year of NFL service, whereas
Hmm.
Voorhees probably will not. And so they
Mm.
still have four
So they,
years of him. He's
yeah,
1 year
after
older,
this year.
admittedly, but
Hmm.
great value in the sixth round for him. I think he's a much better lineman than Salah, and
Hmm.
so did everybody else. I mean, it's no secret. He's really maybe a second round talent that is now
Hmm.
fallen to the Ravens a year older as a sixth round talent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, also another thing to think about is this is a really big year for Ronnie Stanley and his future. So, um, they're looking to, see where Ronnie Stanley is. He's finally healthy and he's looking, and so now we have to see what we have in Ronnie Stanley. If he's able to kind of become, you know, at least close to what he was when we signed him to the big extension. Um, you know, maybe not, he was probably a top two or three tackle in the league when we signed him. Maybe he doesn't quite reach that level, but hopefully he could get to at least maybe a top 10 level left tackle. And you know, this next year will probably be a year where they either look to start to move on from Ronnie Stanley, or
Mm-hmm.
they look to extend him probably long term to kind of end his career as a Raven.
Mm-hmm.
And you know it'll be a big decision that's going to come up in this
Yeah.
next year.
If there's any player who really needed a healthy year to cement his legacy as a Baltimore Raven, it's Ronnie Stanley. He's made a ton of money in the league already, and he's going to make more. That's not really the issue. I mean, at this point, and I don't know how important this kind of thing is to him, but I mean, he's a potential Ring of Honor Raven who will
Hmm.
probably get there if he can play 2023 healthy and at 90% of the Ronnie Stanley level we saw a few years ago when he was before the ankle injury.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
make a good point. I mean, in 2024, you can't cut him this year. It's a $12 million additional cap hit. They could go after June 1 and maybe save a little bit, but still, it would. They need to then find a left tackle. But for 2024, there's an $8.3 million savings, and it's if they cut him, and in his final year in 2025, there's a $20 million savings. So this is what the rubber is hitting the road in 23 in terms of who he is as a player, and frankly, the Ravens will be contorted to a very difficult position of having a lot of very significant needs if Stanley isn't around for 24. He'll still be a relative value then, honestly, and if they have to go out and get a left tackle, that's your first round draft pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Because left tackles, if they're worth anything, they're going in the first round, and really they're going in the first
top
15
half
or so picks. Yeah. So.
Brandon, absolutely love talking football with you. Any chance I get, you're more than welcome to come on the show again and do some things. We've got the 50 or 60 top Ravens players. We'll be talking through 2 at a time. I hope you join us for at least one of those, and we'll have a chance. But really appreciate you coming on the show. Tell folks where people can talk football with you online.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Brandon Croxton 5, and I'm also a season ticket holder, so you can find me in section 106. So yeah, love to talk Ravens. Love talking football.
All right. Outstanding. Thanks again, Brandon. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short this offseason, still lots of opportunity to do that. We got that one play. If you look at Yoshi 2052, by the way, great follow there, Josh Mustiko, but a guy who really does a lot of things with Ravens football, thinks very similar to me. So naturally, I love everything he puts out. But anyway, the thing he put out recently was a YouTube post that had the top 200 plays of all time. If you're thinking, I just don't know what play to do for that one play, take a look through that, because there's a lot of trips down memory lane. You'll take, I remember that. I remember that, and you'll all of a sudden, I hope, want to do a show with me. But hit me up with a DM on Twitter. They're always open. If you have other topics, I'm happy to hear about it. Consistently about outstanding submissions via this, and I want to talk football with you. If you want to be an armchair GM like Brandon has been here, he's played a lot of other roles on this show too. But if you want to be an armchair GM, love to hear from you on that side of the ball too. Brandon, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah,
and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.